First is agenda changes. I know none.
Well, actually, we have meeting procedures.
Okay.
And let me put this on the screen. And basically, I just wanted to mention out here that this meeting is being held remotely due to the current state of emergency and our best conformance to the governor's executive order. We're using Zoom, providing public access through a link to a video conference and by telephone. So we're asking people, we're doing the best we can, so just be patient. We have disabled the chat and public annotation on Zoom, basically in case of hackers and such. We ask that you follow the procedure. We're going to have first part of each of these, we'll have the applicant speak. The board will ask questions, and then the hearing will be open for the public to comment. Please stay muted until it is your time to speak. We don't want to hear the background noise or feedback if you're using multiple listening things. When you speak, please identify yourself. It's very important. And after you speak, and I'm saying this to people, I think we know who all the different people are, but if you happen to be somebody who we're not sure that you may not be identified, we'd like to be able to make everybody as much of an interested party as they can. So far, what I see on the screen are people that we all know, so this may be moot, but if somebody comes on and, or if somebody is hearing me right now and you're new to this and so forth, or you don't have something that's identifying you, just let us know who you are. If you're watching VCAM and you have a question and you can't get through, you can email me. My email is right there, mcypes@hinesburg.org, or you can call, but I'm not going to be able to take those messages, but this will actually give us at least a record of someone being present. All the items shown in the meeting are in the Dropbox. We're not going to be taking new items. We're not going to be accepting links from emails. And again, all to protect the process from hackers and scanners. And I don't think I need to go through the other part of it. I think we're pretty good on that. So let me stop the share here.
Mitch, could we just confirm which board members we have on the meeting right now? My list includes John Lyman, Brandon Martin, Dennis Place, Dick Jordan,
here,
Ted Bloomhart, and I believe we have Greg Waples, but Greg, we haven't heard from you. Can you confirm that you can hear us?
This is Greg. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Greg.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure when there's an unmute button with a slash across it, I'm a little confused about what that really means. That's kind of like a double negative. So you can hear me now, Alex?
Yes.
Okay, so the mute button doesn't have a slash across. Okay, so I can hear you, and I guess you can hear me.
Yes, so when you want to speak, make sure that you don't see that little icon of a red microphone with a slash through it. And the way you toggle back and forth is to click on the little microphone icon, and it'll go back and forth. Thank you, Greg.
Understood.
And we have Sarah as well.
Yes.
Thank you, Sarah.
We have the, as I see it, I'll just say that John Slason and recused himself. We have Brandon Martin replacing him. And we have 7 members of the board that are connected.
All right, if the board members can review the minutes of April 7th.
I guess I saw, this Dick Jordan saw one thing on page 2, section 5, B. The last sentence in that section just sort of seems to end. There's received wastewater permit this morning, has sent. That's just shorthand for the wastewater has been sent to the town. There's no period or anything, so I'm not sure.
I think I might have just missed that in editing.
And Sal, do you have the change to be made there?
Yeah, I can just delete has sent.
Great. Thanks,
Okay.
Sal.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Just one typo, top of page 4, under subpart D, Russell Family Trust. LiDAR is capital I, lowercase, or sorry, capital L, lowercase I, capital D, A-R.
Wait, can you
So
say that again?
this is Greg Waples. I would move to approve as amended.
I'll second that. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Dick Jordan, aye.
Greg Waples, aye.
Claire Murphy, aye.
Ted Bloomhard, aye.
John Lyman, aye.
All right, up next, Black Rock Construction, Haystack Crossing LLC, conditional use review for development in a stream setback. In a continuance from 218 and 317.
For the record, Dave Marshall is here from Civil Engineering Associates on behalf of the applicant.
All right, have you seen how Mitch has put the stuff in to one packet? Starting with the stream setback.
Yeah, we can start with that sheet, C 3.0 for the presentation.
All right.
So in this particular case, there's a stream setback associated with Patrick Brook. This particular plan on your screen is oriented in the northerly direction, being up. And at the very bottom of the sheet is Patrick Brook that runs in the east-west or left-to-right, or actually right-to-left direction. And if we focus in a little bit on that very southerly end or bottom of the sheet, you'll see 3 rectangles. Those are sheets 3.1, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.4, which are more detailed sheets as part of the application package that provide additional detail with regard to the proposed stormwater management and grading components in those areas. Now, with regard to the project's proposed encroachment within the stream setback, there are a couple of areas that are required or requested as part of the project that are required to be reviewed by the Development Review Board. And if we look at sheet 3.1, well, actually, before we go there, I'm sorry, going back to, again, this particular sheet, most everything, you can see a number of stormwater management features that basically parallel the brook. However, there's one that is closer, and that's at the bottom of sheet 3.2. And before we go to 3.2, if we can go to 3.1, it'll help us identify the proposed extension of Center Road in a southerly direction to the property line in support of, and maybe now would be a good time if we can go there. Yep, 3.1. So on the left-hand side of this particular sheet, again, north is straight up. And that heavy dashed black line represents the 100-year floodplain. The far left-hand portion of the drawing shows the applicant's proposed extension of Center Road in the southerly direction to its property line. And in order to facilitate that construction as close to the property line as possible, it does require that we extend this roadway within the 100-foot setback of Patrick Brook. Ultimately, with the Hinesburg Center 2 project going through its particular review and hopefully approval process, that's not an editorial, that there will be a connection across Patrick Brook. And that's consistent with the official map in the town, that as these particular projects go forward, that we make sure that whatever we do, we facilitate the goals that are set forth in the official plan. And this particular depiction at the left side or west side of sheet 3.1 identifies the applicant's efforts to bring Center Road as close to possible to the property line. Now, we will get into a slight tweak, excuse me, at the very southerly end, closest to the brook, that was made to bring it outside of the 100-year floodplain as part of this application. And we'll go back into that a little bit later, but nonetheless, that represents the roadway efforts. And if we go to the next sheet, 3.2, then this shows that same Center Road on the right-hand side of the sheet. It's slightly cut off by the scale bar, but nonetheless, on the left-hand side of that, at the low point of the roadway is actually the stormwater management facility. And this is dedicated specifically to that particular stub portion of Center Road. It's too low in elevation to get it back into the main stormwater collection system associated with the Haystack project, but this particular Center Road, as it extends southerly, does require that have its own dedicated stormwater management facility for the impervious surfaces. And that's what this particular request before the board is a facility at that particular location. Yep, thank you very much for highlighting that. And basically it will treat the stormwater and then basically discharge it on the surface, where it then will flow overland to Patrick Brook. So that is the primary request at this particular location in regards to the encroachments within the 100-foot stream setback. And the other one that we can think of is actually at the far west end of the site, and that would be on sheet C3.4.
And David, I'm going to go back to the first sheet for a moment just to show people. Just so people know that, and I'll just go back to, let me just put this highlight thing back on. The areas before that you were talking about were right in this particular area here. And now we're going to go up to this particular area over here in sheet 310.
Actually, Mitch, if we could, before we go to 3.10, there's one small encroachment on sheet C3.4 at the left-hand side of this particular sheet. And it's basically the discharge from the main stormwater management facility.
You're talking about this pipe over here.
Does require that we have a pipe that extends partway into the stream setback, and there is a level spreader at the end of that. So that is technically another component of the proposed encroachments within the stream setback.
All right.
So the bottom left, just to orient your eye, you can see actually a mapped portion of Patrick Brook, and that's where the vast trail crosses over. That's the bridge. And if you bring your eye north of there, there's a line that runs parallel to Patrick Brook. Nope, not that high. Up a little bit more. Nope.
Oh, I see one. Right. This one.
There we go. So that's a 100-foot setback. And as we follow that across, thank you, you can see that the outfall pipe of this particular facility does propose to extend into this. It's a component of grabbing the lowest elevation possible for discharge points. It helps lower the entire project. If we had to raise the discharge point 1.5 feet, it would basically mean that all the piping, all the roadways, everything would have to come up 1.5 feet. As it is, the road, the entire project roadway system is controlled at points by this particular stormwater collection system that all needs to be coaxed and sent to the low point. And this is one of those control points with regard to the project layout. So we wanted to bring that to your attention as far as the one of the other components before we go to sheet C3.10 in regards to the encroachments into the stream buffer. So here we're up at sheet C3.10, and this is basically the northern third of the project. And there's a stream that currently bisects the property, and there's an existing 24-inch culvert that was put in place for the original water and sewer infrastructure that services Ballard's Corner. And in this particular case, I believe this issue had come up before, perhaps when the Disconnection fields came before the board, but nonetheless, what we were asked to do was take a look at what the hydraulic capacity of this particular pipe is. Now, as it is, the 24-inch pipe, based on the fact that the road is built up, can actually pass the 50-year design storm through this particular area. However, on the right-hand side, where the water's coming downhill towards the roadway system and the recreation path, the water will have to pile up quite a bit, over 5 feet above the invert to create the forces that actually get the water into the pipe. And this is a much deeper, or I'll call it deeper, height of water than what's preferred. Things when it comes to sizing cross culverts is you typically want to limit how deep that water gets on the inlet side, primarily because there are also other things coming down the stream, floatables, whether it be branches or leaves or other things that can clog these particular culverts. So you always want to size your culvert appropriately to both meet the needs hydraulically, but also at the same time make sure there's the capacity to pass floatables that are coming down during a storm event. So in this particular case, what we recommended is a technique used by many agencies of transportation where they run into these same types of challenges, where you actually, because we have to extend this particular culvert in the easterly or the right-hand direction on this particular sheet, what we're proposing to do is actually put in a 30-inch diameter, basically gulping component, which then necks down to the existing 24-inch. And the interesting thing with this particular dynamic of how these particular, what we call inlet control culverts work, is that water works very hard to get into the pipe, but once in the pipe, it normally doesn't use the entire capacity of the pipe. So this is where those particular experiences with those agencies of transportation across the nation have adopted this particular approach of creating a gulper section that then once the water calms down inside the pipe, you can neck it down and then it easily gets carried in the remaining smaller diameter section. So even though the 24-inch pipe could handle the flow, we felt that it was a better design and a better scenario as far as at least getting water into the pipe by putting this particular gulper section on here. So this is work that is occurring within the stream setback. You can see the stream in the middle of the sheet that goes from right to left, and the culvert work that's right in the middle, but offset just to the north is the setback line for the stream. So again, all of these activities as far as crossing the stream and the improvements associated with the roadway and the culvert itself are all part of the project and the request before the board for permission to do work in this area.
So you're going to have to update this plan to show the, you have a 24-inch over here. You're probably going to have to make that a 30-inch.
Yes, that's an incorrect label. Good catch. Thank you.
Okay.
So this is Dick Jordan. Can we go back to the C31 for starters? And then I also want to ask about something on C32.
Dennis, I had asked the question, maybe I I'm not being heard. This is Greg Waples. Am I being heard now?
I hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, so I asked a question and it wasn't heard because I think it was muted. So Dick has a question, and when Dick's question is answered, I have a question.
Okay.
So Mitch, if we can go to sheet C 3.1, there you go.
Yeah, I had a little technical issue here. We're good.
There we go.
Okay, so I noticed that so you're showing the road and you're also showing a walking path to the left of the road. Is everybody in sync with the Hinesburg Center that there's going to be also a walking path crossing there? And then my other question, is that thing going to be a box culvert that's going to carry both the road and the path, or is the path going to have its own bridge crossing?
Hi, this is Michael Busher. I can speak to that since I'm involved with the Hinesburg Center too. Yes, because we're doing the planning for both projects, we have coordinated the design of that bike path between these two projects. So ultimately that recreation path on the west side of the road will connect up. Right now there's a recreation path that goes down Haystack, too many different road names. It goes down Farmall Way, right in front of the Bristol Bakery. Eventually that'll cross over Farmall and continue straight towards the west, and it'll branch and go north. Preliminarily, there isn't any final design plans at all for Hinesburg Center 2, but preliminarily there is a box culvert design that would carry both the road and the bike path in the right recreation path.
Okay, thank you. So C32, I'm just curious about what that circle, it looks like some sort of a walking path in a circle. And also if that is a walking path, it looks like the path just sort of goes to the edge of the wetland area and just stops. What's the purpose of all that?
So this is Michael Busher again. The circle path up there is because we are at the point where we're not at site plan view for the individual lots. You can't see the senior building there, but that circle path is in what we consider a common lot. So eventually that will connect with the rear side of the senior or the congregate housing building. The path goes down to the south because originally we had been requested to provide a pathway along that whole side of Patrick Brook, but there's some discrepancy on whether the town wants that path or doesn't want that path. So what we are showing right now is a dashed in potential path, which would just be I believe a dedicated easement to the town. Dave, Can you confirm is that a dedicated easement, or is it just showing it as a potential path?
So it's still a discussion point as far as whether it be an easement or whether ultimately this open space that runs along Patrick Brook is something that the town is interested in owning. So those are things that will continue to evolve, but we're open definitely to the easement. That's an easy one. And then as far as the outright ownership, there'll obviously have to be some cross easements back to the project or for at least Center Road temporarily to facilitate those particular operational components. Now, the other thing that the reason we showed the little circular walking path was, and Mike is correct, we're not here with site plan applications. We would like to think that we will be there to see you in the future with those. But when we wanted to show at least the path, when somebody said, gee, Dave, why is that particular stormwater facility so oddly shaped? So anyways, it's a byproduct of, again, trying to integrate some of the concepts, master plan concepts for the project, being respective of those. And it's kind of a placeholder right now.
Okay, thank you. It wasn't clear to me the dashed lines was a walking path. I just thought it was contours of the edge of the wetland area. So, okay, thank you.
Well, and this is Ben Avery with BlackRock. And just to add to that, I think right now we are all in agreement that we would be contributing a what's called a floating easement in the spirit of adding to the town trail system. And we're open throughout this process, be it at preliminary or at final, with feedback from the Trails Committee to further solidify that based on what the town is interested in taking on or taking over.
Greg, you had a question?
I did. I think maybe I want to defer it until later conversation. It really relates to stormwater. I don't know if this is the best time to talk about it or not.
Greg, Dave Marshall here. I think we will probably have a dedicated session to deal with stormwater, at which point we'll have the stormwater consultant be available for that particular discussion to allow us to best answer your questions and everybody else's. So thank you very much. We will dedicate your question to a future session.
Okay, then I thought I'd like to leave with you. This is Greg Waples again. I'm just wondering, when you do present your stormwater plan, whether your model would include how Irene in 2000 and wherever it was would affect the distribution of stormwater throughout this project and also on downriver proposals. So I'd be very interested in hearing your input on that coming forward. Tonight's probably not the night that we need to talk about that.
Yeah, Greg, this is Mitch Slaps. I'm gonna comment on that. Basically, they need to design this to the 100-year storm event. And what's kind of interesting when you talk about an Irene, the 100-year storm event comes to the floodplain. That's generally what's been modeled as the effect of a 100-year storm. So that's kind of a quick answer, but yes, we're going to schedule or have a specific hearing where stormwater will be discussed in detail, but not tonight.
Good.
So this is Ted Blumhardt. I also had two questions, but I think both of them probably relate more to the stormwater design than to the working in the stream setback.
Okay, do we have any more on this?
Dennis, do you want to open up to the public each of these different ones? It might be a little.
Well, I didn't know if the applicant had any more or is ready to open it up to the public.
Dennis, this is Greg Waples. Can I just clarify? It's obvious there are going to be future meetings dealing with more specific topics. So it's not like everything is going to get decided tonight.
Correct. All right, I'll open it up to the public.
Hey, Mitch, Bob Hyams, I have a few questions.
All right, I hear you. Go for it, Bob.
Okay.
And by the way, the question may be for David or Mike or Ben, but sure.
Okay. It's probably for Dave. A few things. First of all, is the buffer is that fixed, or is that if you get any channel migration, does that buffer change, or is it going to be a fixed buffer at 100 feet off, whatever current conditions?
It's measured as 100 feet off of the top of bank.
I know, but if the top of bank shifts, what happens? So it's going to, the easement will shift with it, or the buffer will shift with it?
Potentially.
Okay. And then the two discharge, the two stormwater ponds that Dave described. The first one is just west of Center Road. So what is the discharge point of that? That is discharging You say that's a sheet flow or something across the buffer?
I'll let Dave answer that one.
Yep.
So Dave Marshall speaking. So yes, it's basically discharged right to the surface. Our job is to try to distribute the flow in a way it doesn't concentrate or isn't being discharged in a concentrated manner, to give the vegetation that's on site the ability to basically absorb and then convey the flow to Patrick Brook.
Okay. And is that how frequently would you expect that pond to be discharging? I mean, is that sort of a ongoing thing, or is it just at the largest sort of precipitation events?
No, I think it would be something that, there's going to be some natural evapotranspiration that's occurring within the gravel wetland itself, but ultimately once the storm gets larger, similar to under existing, there's enough precipitation event that these heavy soils, that the water starts to roll over the top rather than infiltrate the top. That would be the frequency in which we would see some form of discharge at that particular location.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the large stormwater feature further west. So that has a discharge pipe, but that's still daylighting in the buffer itself, as opposed to, it's not daylighting in the stream channel.
It is. You're right. It's discharging in the buffer. It's not discharging at the stream, primarily because we don't own the property that would allow us to stream. But what we're trying to do is, you can see at the end of that particular pipe on C3.4, or if you can remember it, that there's a large level spreader. And what that is designed to do is basically take the flows out of the pipe and then basically create a mini dam that allows the flow to equally go over the top of that, and then follow the vegetation out towards the brook from that particular point. Now, we chose this particular location primarily because it is already a natural low point as far as flows that come out of this particular part of the property. And so all we're trying to do is basically provide a replication of the stormwater where it currently goes today under natural conditions, and where we're reintroducing it into the landform at its lowest point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the reason I ask, one of the things that we're interested in on the Conservation Commission, and just sort of the conservation community, is sort of the notion of stream channel restoration. And basically all these streams around here that sort of surround the property are incised. And if we restored those stream channels, potentially we would be raising the stream bed. But sounds like that would not be a impediment to these stormwater structures.
I think that's a fair statement in a couple of ways, and the fact that we're not relying upon the channel bottom as it exists today, as far as the controls for this particular stormwater management system, and at the same time, with regard to any future work the town may do or the Conservation Commission may do as far as stream restoration, when it comes to the 100-year floodplain, or I should say the 1% recurrence floodplain, really a lot of that is more influenced by the Platte River and what backwaters are occurring there, and how that basically works back up the valley of Patrick. So I think on both fronts, Bob, that you'd find that you could continue your goals as far as restoring Patrick Brook, and it would not adversely impact this particular project, or I can't speak for the other projects that discharged Patrick Brook, but this one we've specifically shied away from trying to grab the lowest point in the brook itself.
Okay, great. Hey, and then so then going back to the north end of the property, as you know, that Riggs, I don't know if that's part of Riggs Brook or if that's just a ditch at that point, but whatever it is, it's incised. right? I'm sure you've seen it. It's deeply incised and it continues to erode and there's head cuts and all that. Do you think what you're proposing up there is that? I mean, so you have a 30-inch inlet and a 24-inch outlet. Is that discharging sort of high energy water that's going to just exacerbate the erosion and the incision? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's where it's key on the outlet end to basically make sure that you have a suitably sized plunge pool to basically dissipate the energy coming out of the pipe. Lacking that, you're going to basically get a natural scour hole at that particular location. What this particular project isn't trying to do is trying to deal with the remaining downstream sections of the stream as far as what's happening out there, nor in the upstream direction. But it is responsible for providing an appropriate means of stabilized discharge from this particular area. And the other thing to keep in mind is that because the project needs to collect and treat its stormwater, it is taking small portions of land that normally would go to this stream and redirecting it a little down to the major structure that we just looked at.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, everything that gets down to the Platte River gets there one way or the other. But nonetheless, as far as this particular location, we will not have any additional water going to this particular cross culvert than what happens under existing conditions today.
Okay. All right, and then just one last dumb question: is that North Road? Is that the existing road? Is it? I mean, it's the existing road, right? I mean.
Oh, I'm sorry. We call it that crossing, but yeah, you meant the road that's running in the northerly direction. Yeah,
that's the same. That's the same road bed that's there right now, right?
Yeah, there is. It does. Yes. I think we'll just keep it simple. The answer is yes, as far as at least where it crosses the stream.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the access road to Bisnut Field then peels off. But nonetheless, as far as at least the crossing, they are consistent. And that's consistent with both the official map as well as the fact that there's both water and sewer lines that run through this same corridor. And our goal was to basically marry all of the infrastructure, both existing and proposed, in one location.
Okay. Dave, thanks for answering those questions.
You're welcome.
Do we have anybody else from the public?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. This
Okay.
is Andrea Morganti.
Okay.
As I recall, that 24-inch culvert that's under that road, when that was put in, and subsequently when we were talking about getting started on the ball fields, it was understood that it was an undersized culvert at that time. And I just would like to understand why it can't be upsized to an appropriate size culvert.
Andrea, actually, that's what we are proposing to do. Is we're proposing to upsize the inlet end to allow the water to more efficiently get into the culvert. But once it's in the culvert, once it's probably approximately one pipe length down from the inlet end, you don't need any more than the 24-inch culvert to carry the flows through this particular area. So right now it's we're proposing a hydraulic design that both meets a best case design requirement on the inlet, as well as taking advantage of the fact that there is adequate capacity once the water is in the pipe to convey it underneath the roadway and to the point of discharge.
Yeah, the problem being, though, when you make that connection, that becomes a place where there may be more maintenance required between the 24-inch and the 30-inch. So it becomes a long-term maintenance issue for the road crew to have to deal with that connection, as opposed to having a single size culvert under there. So it's a fix, but I'm just wondering about the long-term implications of it.
Well, we'd be happy to work with the highway department if they wanted to increase the size of the culvert. Again, we're not increasing the flows to it. So at this point, we're going over and above what is necessary as far as this applicant's responsibility for that crossing.
Yeah, well, it's, okay. The other thing I have is there is no, you're not requesting a waiver or anything for the path within the 100-foot flood. And I guess you're saying that I'd like to understand more the thinking about this path, because within the buffer and 100-foot, that 100-foot area, there really should not be any development, including a path. So if there's to be a path that connects up to the ball field or someplace, it needs to be outside of that 100-foot line. So I don't want to see there to be shown that there's the development of a rec path in that area. So could somebody, I don't know whether it's Mitch or the Trails Committee or who, could describe the plan for a path?
Well, this is Ben from BlackRock, and Andrea, right now, we're not actually representing a path there. The design of the project gives ample pedestrian access to the rec fields through the sidewalks and just the entire pedestrian network. So the quick answer is we're happy to not build a path. We simply, as we do in many projects, we leave a floating easement that the town can, at a future date, if they so desire, work on expanding a trail network. But at this time, we're not proposing that.
Well,
Right.
well,
So-
I'd like to follow up on that, though, is could you propose a floating easement that's not within the 100-foot buffer?
Dave, can you bring up that section? I don't know if there's room to do that.
So Dave Marshall here, Andrew, to answer your question, there are opportunities to get it as far away as possible. Even in, just to actually reinforce, I'll just finish this, get off my head, but the path that you see here indeed has some grading that falls within the setback of the stream. This is a remnant of the sketch plan where at the time the goal was to create these particular types of walking paths paralleling the streams. And what we are now seeing is that there's some additional thought on perhaps this might not be the best way to go. So we're, as Ben indicated, we're very happy to remove this. What we wanted to identify is at least what it would take in order to facilitate that. But at the same time, very happy to remove that so that you know, we can keep these areas as natural as possible.
I guess I'd like to see some, be sure that there's some conversation with the Trails Committee to understand the need for both sidewalks and some kind of other path. My other question is, will it be possible to see some kind of section drawings and elevations to understand the height of this road and much of the development above the existing elevation? So I see a lot of contour lines as that road comes towards the stream. So how much fill, and also you alluded to the fact of needing to reduce, you know, work with the existing low points to make sure that you have gravity flow to your stormwater pond. So at some point, will you be showing some sections to understand the amount of fill going in on the roads and different infrastructure of the project?
Yes, sorry, Dave Marshall here. Andrea, yes, it's actually a part of the application package where we've created profiles of all the roadways that show both the existing grade as well as the proposed grade, which allows you to very readily understand what's happening along the center line of each one of the roadways. And You know, some of these, you know, for example, as we look at sheet 3.10, your points will taken that on the left side or the west side of that particular Haystack Crossing, you know, we do have elevation that falls off. On the right-hand side, we're really not that far off from existing grade, but because the landfall, existing conditions falls off, in order for us to install all of this infrastructure between the recreation path and the roadway holders for utilities and the trees, that it starts to broaden. And in order to catch the grade, we basically have to grade out from there. So there is, you know, a significant amount of probably about 7 feet of elevation change from the existing grade if you're on the left-hand side of that earthwork area and looking up to the roadway itself.
Okay. Are those profiles in the packet that was available, or those are to come?
Those are
They
in the drop.
it is, but I'll leave it up to Mitch to tell you where to find them.
Okay.
All right, those are in the Dropbox.
Okay.
Actually, probably be easier if I just simply email you which particular plans those happen to be.
Okay. Thanks.
I just want to point out one further thing. One of the reasons why that area is being shown up there is specifically because there was a request for a vast easement, I believe, to continue to create continued access up to the Jiffy, to the Ballard's Corner area. I also should point out that in the zoning regulations, it's specifically noted that the Development Review Board may provide relief to the stream buffer setbacks, including unimproved paths for the purpose of public recreation area located at least 10 feet horizontal from the top of bank. So, and there's about maybe 10 other different things so it's not a cut and dry. There's a lot of discussion on those setbacks. As everybody knows, the 100-foot setback is beyond the state requirement for the setbacks.
All right, do we have anybody else?
This is Kate Kelly. Just a quick question. This may come up later when we look at stormwater regulations, but curious about in particular, the stormwater pond down in the southwest portion of the property, so the large one. It looks like there are some wetlands that are sort of underneath that pond so it would be sort of the eastern side of the pond. There's sort of a small portion of wetland there. I guess I would just urge the board to consider any environmental impact that, might be had by replacing sort of at least what historically would have been a natural wetland with a man-made sort of gravel wetland. So wondering if, the Dave or whoever else, might consider either being able to avoid that area or provide some other mitigation.
So Dave Marshall here. At this point, what our goals was to basically fully respect the class 2 wetlands that are the larger ones with the higher values and functions. And this was basically a drainage corridor that was wet, and being a class 3 wetland, we felt that, as far as balancing all the pros and cons, that was going to be one that would be impacted as part of the project. So as far as enhancements, there are areas that we're looking at trying to provide additional things along Patrick Brook. So there's a package of enhancement restoration components that this particular project is proposing that we're very happy to continue to work with Conservation Commission on how to best achieve their thoughts and goals within this particular corridor.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? All right, are we ready to move on to low impact design?
Dave Marshall says yes.
Okay. So we're on
So
C2.
Actually, there are two documents that we provided in support of this particular discussion. One of them was the Haystack Crossing Low Impact Development Narrative dated March 3rd. And then there was also a package of plans called Combined LID Plans that support that particular narrative. And I think in order to go through the 8+ pages of narrative, or we can keep it more global, and then we can drill down as necessary by perhaps using, the C2.0 sheet. There you go. So in this particular case, the plan set has about 12 sheets in it, and the regulations in town require that an applicant put into place LID practices to allow the project to minimize its impacts on bigger picture, more centralized stormwater management approaches. You know, try to treat the water at its point rather than at a point foreign to where it normally would be flowing. And the LI, in this particular case, one of the reference documents within the zoning regulations is a low LID document prepared by the city of South Burlington that ultimately has also been adopted by the town of Shelburne. And it does a nice job. It's both technical and layperson oriented as far as a discussion on 6 different categories of LID techniques, and within each one of those, a number of different stormwater treatment practices that can be employed to, again, achieve the goals. Now, one thing that we noted in this particular exercise is that within that particular manual, it provides a couple of examples of how a project is to implement these LID. And what I kind of found curious is that even though this particular project adopts about 12 different ideas as far as LID out of the probably 20 that are available, the examples that that particular manual provided only adopted 3 or 4. So we felt that we were headed in the right direction as far as the LID discussion, and some of them we will admittedly will have to give credit to the town of Hinesburg, only because many of the initial big picture LID techniques actually looks or have been embedded into your regulations. So as far as, again, avoiding streams and finding ways to create compact development, you know, your regulations specifically talk to those things. So if we kind of can work our way through these particular 12 sheets of C2.0, you'll see highlighted with a title on the bottom right, these particular types of LID methods that are being employed. Now, some of them you're going to say, well, Dave, you know, you have to do it anyways. And you're right, we have to do it anyways. Again, some communities don't, you know, have the foresight that Hinesburg does in regards to how to shape development in a way that tries to minimize those secondary impacts to the receiving waters. So in this particular case, yes, we are taking credit for what the South Burlington or Shelburne manual says you should be doing. Some of them were easy because we had to do them anyways. But that all being going around is we start with the top sheet, cluster development. This is where you basically take a lot of units and try to coalesce them into small areas. And that allows for the demands of housing and other commercial establishments to be focused in a designated area and not be spread out through other parts of town. So in this particular case, that yellow area represents the high density component. Granted, there's a couple of green park areas in between them, but nonetheless, that's at least what this particular technique asks an applicant to do. If we can go to the next page to highlight this particular component, here we're trying to, when you minimize setbacks, so in many of your rural areas, you might have much wider setbacks where the building has to be 50 feet away from the roadway. By reducing setbacks and bringing the building and the driveway lengths closer to the street, you will essentially reduce the amount of impervious area that's necessary. So in this particular case, that's what your regulations propose or allow, and the applicant in this particular master plan has basically adopted those ideas as far as bringing the buildings closer to the streets. And then you can especially see it on the left-hand side as it runs out along the westerly and northwesterly portions where the buildings, again, are closer to the street, larger backyards. It helps, when you have a family, that you have at least not an area broken up, so at least you can do something in the backyard. So those are some of the things that are done to actually reduce the amount of impervious surfaces for the project. So going to the next sheet, here, open space preservation. There's a lot of the land that falls to the west. Here we've highlighted the green components, which are, again, you can see the narrow fingers. Those are the stream setbacks, or just green, or just more open space areas beyond just the stream setbacks that have been proposed as part of this project. And then, of course, the much larger area to the west. Some of it is upland, some of it is wetland, some of it's floodplain. But nonetheless, one of the methods within the LID manual is, hey, if there's areas that you can consolidate and then preserve more open space, then that's what you should be doing. So that's what the green hatched area represents as far as one of the methodologies within the LID manual. So the next sheet talks about shared driveways. And here, anytime you can basically get people to obviously share a driveway, basically instead of having two driveways, you have one. And in this particular case, we have some lanes that are, rather than creating full width roadways, we basically are sharing a narrower driveway type with everybody in this particular neighborhood. So rather than having long driveways trying to extend out the street, we basically have this intermediate feature that basically helps to bring or reduce the length of the driveways that are necessary to support each one of the homes. The next sheet is site fingerprinting. And this is basically a lot of what we just talked about, where you basically take a look at the site and you identify where you should and shouldn't be putting various types of development. And in this particular case, the brown areas represent ultimately the remaining areas that were left. This happens to propose phase one. There is a future phase two of the project, but at this point, phase one is identified in the brown, and it represents the areas that, again, aren't floodplains, aren't wetlands. We talked about the major wetlands, excuse me. And even some of the open space that was hard to get to the west, even though it's upland area, was area that again, in the town's own plan, basically said, you should just stay out of there. So this particular project or this particular property is reflecting those particular goals. And this happens to be one of those LID techniques in finding ways to, again, keep your development within concentrated areas. Vegetative.
David, if I can ask you something, clarify something. Yeah,
yes.
Isn't this also where all the construction equipment and such is going to be stored? So kind of the idea is that you're not going to have equipment and such beyond that particular area?
So Mitch is doing my dirty work for me. He's basically cleaning up what I forgot to mention. What we're trying, site fingerprinting actually is, when you actually read through the document, talks about controlling activities in a way that they don't create secondary impacts on the open space areas. And one of the things that's employed during the construction phase is delineations of where the allowable disturbance areas are and where you cannot go. So that is, thank you, Mitch, for reminding me that's one of the components that the state of Vermont has actually adopted through its EPSC, that's Erosion Prevention and Sediment Control programs, where it basically says, hey, make sure your contractor doesn't go willy-nilly and go in places where he shouldn't. He may not realize how sensitive certain areas are, and we need to send a signal that basically controls that situation. So that is an integral component of the management of secondary encroachments beyond this particular brown area. And those particular controls are shown on the erosion prevention and sediment control plan sheets that are part of the application package. Thanks, Mitch.
You're welcome.
So the next sheet, vegetative buffer, and now I'm going to start sounding like a broken record, but you know, this goes back to, again, just creating buffering from the resource areas and from the, between the resource areas and the development area. So here again, to the credit of the state of Vermont, but they're not as aggressive as the town of Hinesburg with regard to stream setbacks. So again, in this particular case, pat yourselves on the back that even, that we kind of backed into this particular LID technique, but it was only because we had to. So like to give ourselves more credit, but we'll call it what it is. Now, this next sheet, disconnection of impervious area, is something that is controlled by the applicant in regards to the layout of the buildings and the green space. And when we talk about disconnection of impervious areas, what I need to have you think about is perhaps a walkway. Maybe it's at your house, or maybe it's a sidewalk, or maybe it's a walkway that runs out through the middle of the field. But when it rains, if it's a asphalt or a concrete surface, it obviously doesn't infiltrate. But nonetheless, it is designed to sheet flow off of the surface and then hit the vegetation, with the grass or meadow or whatever adjacent to it. And eventually, those drops of water that couldn't infiltrate the 5-foot width of sidewalk, for example, does infiltrate, given the opportunity, an area downhill of it. And if that area is not too steep, or if it happens to be long enough to allow those drops of water to find their way back into the crevices of the topsoil, what you've done is basically mitigated the impacts of that that impervious area. And what this particular diagram shows is the green areas where the for example, roof runoff that comes off the backside of the house and wants to go downhill. Well, if you have provided enough width and depth of these particular flow paths, these drops of water for the smaller events that make up the majority of the precipitation events actually have an opportunity to get back into the soil and replicate the conditions that exist under today's conditions. So that's where disconnection comes from. And these are these green areas represent where we are proposing this particular disconnection feature. And again, LID is a technique that has actually been adopted in large ways by the state stormwater management rules and its design manual. And you actually get credits for providing these particular disconnections. So there is, it helps us downsize or reduce the size of some of the treatment facilities that are necessary. It doesn't really do the job for the large storm events. Once you get a big enough storm event, everything's just rolling off the top of the ground. There's only so much it can absorb. And that's where the stormwater facilities downstream are designed to deal with those storms. You heard Mitch mention that because of the size of this particular project, we're required to mitigate the 100-year design storm as part of management of drops of water rolling out of each one of these areas. So disconnection credits are good for smaller storms, but for the larger storms, ultimately, we need to have a more formal centralized management facility. And that's basically the program that this particular project has put together. So now if we can go to the next sheet, landscaping practices. This is where we start to get a little bit more aggressive with the opportunities to change a challenging situation into a good situation. So when we talked about working with the Conservation Commission with regard to, you know, these buffering areas to Patrick Brook, you can see a lot of green area on the south side of the project site where we've specifically identified these for reforestation. So when you drive by today, a lot of the historically tilled lands go right up to the property line. Now, once you get over the property line, that's where some of the tree line begins. But nonetheless, this particular layout provides the opportunity to actually restore those historically tilled areas into something that can be a more stable buffering component from Patrick Brook back out into this particular project site. So that's those are the things that we're looking to do to, again, allow the landform to absorb the drops of water coming out of the sky in a better manner. Trees actually do a great job of what we call interception of water. So when it rains, you know, where do we go? We go to the tree and stand underneath it until it really starts raining hard. But in those intermediate periods, you know, you're staying dry because all the leaves are basically collecting the water and holding it. And then eventually, when it stops raining, the water on those leaves evaporates. So it prevents water from reaching the ground. We've got enough in Vermont, so we're not worried about creating droughty conditions. But nonetheless, trees are an important way of basically balancing the hydrologic balancing of watersheds, and this is a component that we're looking to implement as part of both the LAD expectations, but also just what seems to be the right thing to do along this particular section of Patrick Brook. So Bob and the Conservation Commission, we look forward to, again, implementing some of your ideas as far as thoughts on both species types and densities and locations that wouldn't get in the way of perhaps some of the other things that you're thinking about in regards to restoration of Patrick Brook. So we've got another 3 or 4 sheets. So this particular soil conservation and amendment sheet, this is new in 2017 to the state stormwater manual. It's actually a technique that for those sensitive to making sure that soils around your impervious surfaces can actually infiltrate drops of water is a requirement now that any time that you are doing construction, that you have to make sure that the soil, the top 12 inches, the soil that goes back is both not compacted, but also has appropriate amendments in it, so that it is a beneficial and fruitful manager or filter of water coming off of these impervious surfaces. So all of that text on the left-hand side represents the obligations of both the applicant and the contractor on the site to manage the topsoil and the top 12 inches of soils that go back on the site. So no longer are we having situations where you see the lifts that are working around the buildings and then they come back with 4 inches of topsoil. And well, 4 inches of topsoil works okay, but it's really lost the capacity of the remaining 8 inches underneath it because the wheels of the lifts have compacted the area so much that it really just doesn't operate the way it did prior to development. So what we're trying to do is, again, minimize the amount of erosion from the site, runoff from the site through proper management of the top 12 inches of the soil. And those are the goals that are outlined in the soil conservation and amendments component of the LID manual that are, again, a part of this particular project going forward. So the next one, runoff practices. This is, this is going to sound very similar to another slide that you're going to see as far as grassline swales. And in this particular case, the runoff conveyance, anytime you can take a drop of water and and try to and move it over a long distance. You know, for the small storms, you actually might get some infiltration back in the ground. Now, we do have heavy soils out here. We're not going to fool each other that we don't. And you also have some places of high groundwater, but during the summer, we do see that that groundwater table does recede, and the opportunities to again try to allow drops of water if they can't, you know, if the 70 feet behind the house isn't enough for the drop of water to get in the ground, maybe having it run out over a distance of 400 feet might give it a better chance to basically re-infiltrate the ground. So again, anytime we can create a long flow path, we do have one particular opportunity that's between the nut fields and the residential homes on the west side of the development area. That is one of the, again, LID techniques that's identified and being implemented in this particular project. Next sheet, there we go, vegetated swales. This is a smaller scale of the long conveyance where, again, we're utilizing, you know, rather than putting it in the pipe, leave it on the top of the ground and allow it to basically use gravity to go where it needs to go. So here it's vegetated, and again, the benefits of this particular site, because it is flatter, it's not on the side of a hill, allows us to create these lower velocity transition routes to, again, allow the drops of water to have a better chance to infiltrate the ground surface itself. And lastly, yes, number 12, here we talk about rain barrels and cisterns. This is a package program that the applicant will be proposing. They will be building these particular residential homes, and as part of the package, they will be offering each one of the new homeowners the opportunity to have plumbed into the house or the gutters or whatever the case may be, the ability for somebody to collect rainwater and then reuse it for their garden or anything else that they have the imagination for. So that is the last of the low impact development or design techniques that this particular project is proposing to implement. Again, I talked about infiltration or the inability to actually infiltrate because of the heavy soils and the high groundwater table. A lot of the palette, or the remaining palette, you know, we'll call it probably about a third of the total amount of listing of LID techniques, is associated with getting a drop of water just to infiltrate ground right there. So if we happen to be in a sand pit and we were creating impervious surfaces, and we could simply redirect the water to places we could infiltrate them back in the ground, that would be great. But that's just not what the opportunity here, this particular property, provides, primarily because of the nature of the old lake bottom, heavier silty clay soils that occupy the site. So those are the challenges, and we are going to try to take advantage of this top 12 inches of soil that we can control better. But unfortunately, once it gets below the 12 inches, it doesn't want to go any further other than horizontally and flow through the soil ultimately to the brook. So, you know, when we're infiltrating water into the soil profile, it does help maintain base flows for streams. So those are always features and goals that we're trying to implement in order to minimize impacts on the receiving waters. So I've said enough for now.
This is Dick Jordan. I have a question about rain barrels and cisterns. Are these enclosed storage devices, or are they open?
I'm not sure if I'm following your question.
Are they open? Are they open to the air, or are they all? Is the barrel enclosed? Is the cistern enclosed? Because on one hand, we're told don't leave things laying around that collect water because of mosquitoes, and then I just want to know: is the rain barrel or the cistern, is that going to be an open tub of water?
This is Mike Busher.
All right. I'm sorry, Dave Marshall. I'm question now. My understanding or my familiarity is that they're always enclosed barrels, that that ultimately the gutters, for example, or a certain section of gutters get piped directly into that particular cistern. There is an overflow that once it's full, it obviously has to go somewhere, but nonetheless, typically they are closed tops. I don't see a lot of benefit of open tops, putting aside the mosquito thing. It's just another place for things that are blowing through the air to end up on the top and then end up in the bottom of the barrel. So in this particular case, my familiarity is that typically these are specially made barrels for this particular use that are closed top.
Okay, thank you.
Any of the other board members have questions on these sheets?
Dennis, I've got one quick thing that I just noticed on this rain barrel and cistern sheet. This is for subs. David, you included the quadplexes by Haley Lane and Haystack. But what about the 3 quadplexes at South End Circle? Could they also be included?
Hey, Ben, I'm going to drag you into this discussion. Is there any reason?
That's okay. No, there's no reason why those couldn't be included. So we can add that to the scope.
Good.
Anybody else before I open it up to the public? All right, anybody from the public?
This is Bob Hyams. I have a question. Can I go?
Yeah.
So Dave, on the, I guess, disconnection, those areas, and you're talking about infiltration and how you guys are managing the top 12 inches. Do you have a general sense of what the soil conditions are there? I mean, we know it's clay, right? It looks like it's Covington and it's Virgins primarily on the map. Is there a plow pan layer, sort of on that site that can be dealt with in any way to help, improve infiltration?
Well, there's, right now under existing conditions, the till depth is that 6 to 8 inch range, and usually it doesn't go much deeper than that. And in this particular case, because of the obligations to manage the top 12 inches, we actually can perhaps make the existing conditions even better, because once you get below that 7 to 8 inch range, you basically get right into the old undisturbed native soils that are pretty challenging as far as if you're a drop of water trying to go straight down through it. So I think we can have the opportunity to create a little bit more storage. It's minimal, but nonetheless, the opportunity to manage top 12 inches is better than how, as far as at least volume-wise, the top 8 inches has been managed in the past.
Okay, and just briefly, so what are the management techniques that you would apply to those top 12 inches?
So we're basically, you are typically moving the soil off to the side, making sure the topsoil is separated from any other materials. We have the opportunity to put back mostly topsoil because of the new development areas that are being proposed. So we can basically take the existing, 4 to 6 inches of topsoil and basically almost double it up when we're putting it back. So nonetheless, our other obligations are to basically make sure that it has proper, I want to say nutrients, but I want to be careful there. We don't want to basically be implying that we are going to be creating future nitrogen load stream or things of that particular nature. Bob, I'm a little flat-footed as far as remembering exactly all the tools that we have to put into place, but the state in its recent seminars that it's been presenting has been very clear that the requirements set forth in the narrative on the left, and I don't mean to bore you by having you read it, but because my eyes aren't good enough to try to read it myself right now.
Okay.
is that there are certain amendments in order to basically make the soil as healthy as possible before you put it back.
Okay, but it's basically it's laid out on that sheet.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody else?
Yeah, this is Kate Kelly again. I just have a question for Dave, I guess, about the rain barrels. It was my understanding from the Vermont Stormwater Manual that rain barrels essentially needed to have an identified use for the water. So you had to, show that there were plantings or a garden that the homeowner would be using that water for, and that there was like a certain volume that it would be used for, like an inch per week or something along those lines during that period of growing season. So I'm wondering how, the statement that the rain barrels will be offered as part of a package, how that sort of fits within that manual or within those guidelines.
Well, actually, we think it fits fairly well, only because anybody who's going to actually be asking and paying for the rain barrel package probably has the intended benefit or use on the other end of the spigot. We aren't proposing as part of the modeling of these systems to take the credits for the rain barrel use, because it is so hard at this particular point of the project to say, yes, of course, 40% of these homes will have rain barrels and they will have gardens and you're going to take care of your garden. So we're really not in that particular area, but we did want to identify at least where we wanted to promote, this particular type of thing. And if it's something that a homeowner isn't thinking of at the time when they purchase their home, that when this particular option is provided to them, they can say, oh yeah, well, of course, we're going to have a garden. And rather than use the town's water, which has its own story, we're going to use rainwater. So that's the intent. Again, not trying to deal with an obligation to jam a certain amount of usage down the throats, but we also want to be in a position to promote it as much as possible.
Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't understand that this was not part of your credit, so that makes more sense. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. David, how long do you think it'll take you to get through the traffic? Or who's doing the traffic?
There's probably one item that is probably going to take us a good 15 minutes to talk about. But otherwise, our summary is that we're going to be making most of the recommended revisions that came out of your consultant's review of the traffic studies that had been prepared for the project, and we can go quickly down. We've consolidated some of our responses, but nonetheless, we can head down there. So to answer your question, I think we're probably in the 20 to 30 minute range. Ben?
And just to jump in and add to that, I did speak with Corey today, and Mitch. We will have, as Dave said, the bulk of these recommendations, we will be providing the additional information, and we should have that to you in about 14 days. So we should be able to complete the traffic review at the next meeting.
So do we want to just quickly go through it for this meeting and then we'll finish it up at the next meeting?
That would be great.
All right.
So the only thing that will not allow us to do is we won't be able to get into detail, as far as exactly how or what the results of those particular changes mean, as far as the final determination of what's necessary to mitigate the traffic from the project. But it will give you at least a flavor of what we are agreeing to do and or not agreeing to do, so we can at least be absorbing that before the next meeting.
Yeah,
So,
Dave, I think in the interest of time, we can probably, without on these items where basically our consultant is in agreement with the town's consultant, we can probably pretty much skip right over those. Everybody has a copy, and we can, simply say if it's item one, we concur with Stantec's analysis, and we will provide that shortly, and just go down and focus on the couple of items that we need to discuss. Does that make sense?
Sure.
David, what would you want me to place on the share?
Well, let's see here. Why don't we bring up what was
So Corey
shared
Mack's
with you?
memo?
Yeah.
All right, so you talk, okay, sure.
Because that really breaks it down, Mitch, into the specific items that Stantec brought up as items that we need.
Okay.
It might be nice, this is Alex Weinhagen, it might be nice for the viewing audience just to understand that at the February 18th opening meeting on this project, staff recommended that the town engage an independent traffic engineer to do a peer review of the applicant's traffic impact study. And the applicant agreed and the board agreed. And so the town hired Rick Bryant at Stantec, which is a transportation consulting group, to do an independent review of the traffic study that the applicant's engineer from RSG did. And so if anyone's not clear on what we're all talking about, this memo from Corey Mack at RSG is a response from the applicant's engineer to the recommendations that the town's independent traffic engineer made.
That's good. So if we can just kind of work our way down through without spending a lot of time unnecessarily just yet, with the understanding we'll have the opportunity in the future to drill down. As far as comment number one, our traffic consultant will update in accordance with the recommendations set forth. Just a background is that it appeared, long story short is our traffic consultant had generated a lot of the information that was requested by Stantec. And in this particular case, it won't take much for us to repackage it or, just make sure it gets into his hands. So long story short, a lot of the answers are yes, of course we will, because it either should be done or has been done. So item number one, we will be doing that, and similar, item number two will also be addressing that particular requirement. So Mitch and Alex, I don't know if you want us to read the comment. Maybe we should just do that, and that'll allow the public who can't be looking at this to at least hear the point and to hear the applicant's response. So starting with number one, provide a synchro highway capacity manual reports for intersection operations to define operations by lane group, including volume to capacity ratio. So volume to capacity ratio is an important thing to understand. Hey, how much capacity is left at the intersection? So the documents that are necessary to more readily allow a third party to understand the capacity of the intersection, we will be putting together that package of information for the project. Number two, review crash reports to better understand the cause of crashes occurring at the proposed site drive location. So right now, we have a actually as part of this project, we have a proposed entry from the project in the easterly direction out to Route 160 and Hinesburg Road at the Riggs Road intersection. And that's consistent with the official plan for the town. And right now, the question is when that particular area is all queued up, what's happening? Why are there accidents? What's the cause of the accidents? Is it because somebody's not paying attention and they bump into the back of somebody else? We wanted to, the request was to drill down a little bit further, understanding both the type and the time of day when these particular accidents occurring, to provide a better background understanding of what the challenges are in this particular section of the highway. So we will do that. Item 3, update no-build conditions to reflect the current status of the Hannaford Brothers project. Omit Hannaford Brothers traffic and Hannaford Brothers mitigation from the no-build and build conditions. So there were certain improvements that the Hannaford project was proposing to do to mitigate their traffic impacts. And at the same time, when we originally prepared these particular reports, we had included the Hannaford concentrated traffic flows in and out of the store as part of the background traffic, what in theory was going to be background traffic by the time this project came forward. We now know that's all changed, and we will be updating the report to eliminate those particular conditions associated with Hannaford's project. So that's a yes. Number 4, include the Lampman entrance driveway intersection in the traffic networks and analysis results. So they, that's a funny intersection where you basically have 5 legs at that particular signal controlled location. And for Lampman, as we all know, you have an in on one side of the building and an out on the other. And right now, our consultant's traffic study did not identify the character of that intersection because, in theory, Hannaford was going to supplant that particular Lampman's location, and we now know that that's no longer the case. So we're going to basically reestablish the traffic at that particular intersection and report on results of what the Haystack project may do to the capacity of that intersection.
This is Dick
number
Jordan.
5.
I have a question maybe for Mitch or Alex regarding that intersection. I know Hannaford's was going to talk about changing the signaling. That's gone away, but I thought there was some talk of the town looking into having that signaling changed. Is that true? And if so, is that going to be taken into account in this traffic study?
This is Alex Weinhagen. Dick, I can speak to that. Actually, the town doesn't have any plans to address improvements to the intersection that you're referring to. That's the intersection at Route 116 and Charlotte Road near Lampman's. We did a feasibility study with the help of the Regional Planning Commission recently to understand what the changes that Hannaford was going to make would likely cost. Those cost estimates were in about the $88,000 range. And at this point, that money was not included in the proposed town budget for the fiscal year that starts July 1st. VTrans at the state level doesn't have that money allocated to make those changes either. So it's a recognized intersection in terms of needing some improvements to make it function more efficiently, but there's no promise that it will happen on a particular time frame instigated either by the town or the state. Personally and professionally, I hope that we will move on that, but the town has a lot of spending responsibilities and priorities, and so I can't speak to when it will rise high enough on that list.
Okay, thank you.
This is Mike Busher. Alex, I was just curious, do those improvements go beyond just timing of the light and the changes to the sidewalk near the exit for Lampman's? Are there additional improvements that were suggested?
Yeah, I would recommend taking a look at that feasibility study, which I believe there's a link to on our website. If not, I'm happy to provide it. The bulk of it are the improvements you mentioned, but there were a couple of other suggestions for left-hand turn lane to enter the entrance to Lampman's, and some curbing changes in that arena as well. But principally, it's the improvements you mentioned, the relocation of the sidewalk to allow for safer exiting of Lampman's, including right on red, and the resynchronization of the lights.
Good. Dave Marshall, I'll continue on. Item number 6, review and revise, if appropriate, trip generation adjustments made to account for accommodations for alternative modes and internal trip making, provide documentation to support assumptions made in this regard. So there were some comments that basically said, where'd you come up with this? And what this is that if your project is really successful and you have a lot of people that basically wake up and walk to work within your project, then you basically taken trips that otherwise somebody might be going either across town or to somebody else's town off the roadway. And there are certain assumptions based on mixed use projects in regards to how much you can reduce what ultimately is modeled to leave your site and create impacts at other nodes within the transportation system. So right now, what the Stantec consultant asked to do is to ask our consultant to better document the credits that were included in this particular study, and our consultant has agreed to provide that additional information and to back up the credits that were taken or to adjust them accordingly. So that's where we're on that one. Number 7, define the improvements proposed by V-Trans at the Shelburne Falls Road from Route 116 intersection and the schedule of implementing these improvements. Suggest modifications to these improvement plans if appropriate to accommodate full build out phase 1 plus phase 2 condition traffic volume. So going out to Shelburne Falls Road and its intersection with Route 116 and CVU Road, we've been talking about this for a long time. You know, when we first started the project back in 2013, it was on the list of things for V-Trans to do, and here we are 7 years later. And Mitch, I don't know if you know if we're any closer, but we keep being promised that next year is the year it's going to be funded, and hopefully there won't be any emergencies that take that money away. But there are going to be certain turning lane improvements made at that intersection and to improve the capacity and the ability to basically move people through there. And what we want to do is make sure that this particular project and its traffic meshes properly. Admittedly, there's some old designs still on the plans that should be updated to reflect current thinking in regards to pavement widening and the like. So if there's turning lanes that aren't necessary, imagine that, but there is one that's a remnant of the original actually Ballard Corners project that we will be updating. So that's my confession in regards to what the civil engineer needs to be doing as far as updating plans. The traffic engineer admission is that we will be better coordinating between the two of us as far as what's necessary to basically make traffic better move through that particular area. And we're obviously fully committed to that for phase 1. I think what we have a bigger concern about as far as trying to model phase 2 is that the time frame between now and when a phase 2 may actually come back before you. We have no idea what's happening a year from now, let alone 5 years from now. And we're just concerned that this may be a resource that may, you know, if we did it, we would end up redoing it again at some point in the future, only because the assumptions that were made today are probably, unless we've got a perfect crystal ball in front of us, is not necessarily going to be reflective of what's out there in the future. And then you will say, well, Dave, your assumptions were quite right, so why don't you do the traffic study again? So what we are fully committed to do and have to do is to identify, model, and determine and fix any impacts associated with the phase 1 project. And in the perfect world, if we knew exactly what the future conditions would be, we would roll out phase 2 and include that all in today's study. But we're just not feeling that that's really a prudent use of time and resources right now. So that is an exposure. You know, who knows that, you know, as far as phase 2, that we may find that if we had spent, an extra $10 of widening the road, that we wouldn't have to spend $15 later on to do it. And that's on us, that's not on you. So that's a risk that we're at this point in time comfortable taking, only because if we did the phase 2, I don't know if it would be worth the paper it's written on, because you and I don't know what it's going to be 5 years from now as far as conditions in town. We've seen it change dramatically in the past year. So that all being the background, that's kind of one of our pushback positions as far as at least trying to expand the traffic study to include phase 2, and we're very, very committed to phase 1, but right now not committed to doing phase 2 work.
A question from Dick Jordan. So I get that it's kind of hard to look into the crystal ball and know what your solutions for phase 2 would be, but wouldn't it still be appropriate to at least include the trips and things from what's anticipated, the residential and whatever mixed use is going to be thought about for phase 2, and basically recompute the given the phase 1 conditions, compute the intersection grades again. I mean, did things go from a B to a D? Wouldn't that still be useful to tell us whether or not we're on the verge of a problem?
If we knew phase 2 was going to go forward, that would be useful information, absolutely. If we knew exactly what the scope of phase 2 was going to be, that would be useful. And if we knew how much traffic was being developed by the rest of the community, at which point phase 2 was proposed to you, the answer is yes. But we don't know any of those things. So, at this point, we're just guessing. We're just throwing darts at the wall, trying to figure out, what is the assumption of the day that we're going to use. And as turbulent as the world is right now, I'm not in a position to comfortably tell you, what it's going to be like in 5 years as far as background conditions or what the character of this particular project will be. So as beyond phase 1, which is what the applicant is committed to. And, I hate to be a stick in the mud, but I think at this point in time, unless we knew exactly what the conditions were going to be, that it's really just a waste of paper.
Well, and Dave, it's important to point out that it's not just our phase 2, it's what's going on across the street at Riggs Road. You have multiple applications that have gone through sketch plan. You have a plan energy, which may or may not move forward. And to really echo Dave's point, you have Hannaford's that's come on the board, come off the board. The Hinesburg Center development has been unfolding for the last 15 years. I mean, the number of permeations that can change in a 5 to 10 year period is almost infinitesimal given the number of things going on and the length of time it's taken them to get where they are today, and the length of time it may take them to get to a point where they're coming to fruition. And so as the applicant, what I don't think is fair to us is to make up some numbers which may or may not be accurate at some point in time, maybe, without really having an understanding of all of the other things that may be going on around our development, maybe. And then having that be a point of conversation in this proceeding. I mean, the whole backbone of the zoning reg is we should be reviewing the application that's before us, not an estimate of what might happen maybe in the future.
Well, so that's why I'm not saying you should guess at what NRG is going to do. But we do have a master plan for your specific development, and phase 2 did envision certain things filling in those blocks. So I don't quite understand why you can't make a reasonable estimate for your own traffic volumes and how that would affect the various intersections, with all the other background being the same. But to include your phase two, it doesn't seem to me to be unreasonable to make an estimate based on your master plan that we've already been looking at.
So, but I guess my question is, to what end? So it is the board's position that if we were to provide guesstimate numbers based on an application that isn't technically before you, then what it opens the door for the board to, it may affect the board's decision or the board's outcome on conditions based on a maybe.
I guess I won't disagree that it could affect the board's decisions.
And
so it's as far as I'm concerned, that's part of what we're here for, not just this phase, because we're hoping the whole thing gets built out. So at any rate, I'm just one board member.
Yeah, I don't. This is Ted Bloomhart. I don't think our decision would be, for this phase, would be informed based on something that we don't have a schedule for. And if that eventual phase two is, adds to an unacceptable traffic condition, then we'd be talking about what mitigation could be implemented at that time to address that. I don't think it would inform our decision now, is my point.
This is Alex Weinhagen. If I could chime in, I think there are good arguments to be made on both sides of this question. And I'm a planner, like a lot of us are. So, more information to me sounds better. But I hear what Ben's saying, and he's been clear about that all through this process, that he's happy to provide information that we need, but he doesn't want to give us bad information and then have decisions be made based on guesswork. With that said, Dick's right. I mean, there is a master plan, and I wonder if there are internal traffic flow, both vehicular and pedestrian, but principally vehicular improvements within phase one that might actually want to be somewhat different if phase two were considered. And once phase one is built and those intersections exist with buildings around them, it'll be very difficult to retrofit them. Whereas the 116 intersection, we've talked about a phased plan to make improvements to that during this phase, and then perhaps additional ones at a future phase. So Ben, I would just urge your traffic consultant to think about that and think about whether, like Dick said, having some general information about a possible phase two might inform whether the design for certain intersections within interior of the project might want to be tweaked or allowed more room for the future.
Well, why don't I do this? And I don't, anytime I ask an engineer for something broad, it's always tough to get an answer. But perhaps I can ask Corey if he's able to look at it through that lens, if you will, and give us a brief synopsis of his opinion based on the existing data without having to, so sort of take our existing data, take some assumptions associated with the concept that is phase two, and sort of give you a brief overview, as opposed to trying to dive into recalculating all of the tables and sort of doing a full start to finish. Does that make sense?
Sounds okay to me.
Yeah, this is Alex, and it sounds great to me. I totally understand why you're hesitant to have him start doing trip generation for a completely conceptual phase two, but at least some sort of idea of, based on general assumptions would be good.
Yeah, and maybe to follow up on your specific point, even I'd like to hear Corey say, hey, taking into account sort of this, macro view of proposed phase 2, we feel like the internal movements are would be acceptable, and we feel like this intersection may need to be revisited in the future when we add these units. Some sort of real broad strokes like that, but that would give you folks an idea of what his opinion is based on our build out, and then also where he potentially could see some more focus going in the future in the next phase.
This is John Lyman. I guess I agree that it would be nice to know with phase 2, would it add 1%, 2%, 5% of traffic? I mean, I think it's correct. We could get some generalizations. I hate to see it the corners be too tight right off the get-go if we think it's going to go beyond its capacity.
Yep, that makes sense. So
Thank
we'll work on something to that, and to come in that same 2-week time frame.
All right, Dave, you ready to go on to the next one?
Absolutely. Okay, moving on. Number 8, expand the study to include the phase 2 development program. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? This should be done as a second build scenario, and understanding of phase 2 impact can inform decisions regarding proposed site access conditions and area roadway improvements currently under consideration. So I think we beat that horse up, but I think in regards to what Alex pointed out, which is internal to the project, and before we have created conditions that are hard to undo, that are our own making, that it would be prudent to basically have Corey Mack take a look, see at every one of those locations where traffic is being brought together, and making sure that under future conditions that internal to the project that we haven't pinched ourselves in any unnecessary way. So I'm going to jump to 9. Evaluate left turn lane warrants for both side access points, including left turn condition for traffic entering Ricks Road from Vermont 116 southbound. So the traffic consultant said they will do that. And in this particular case, we are dealing with some dynamics as far as the future of the 116 corridor and what's happening at the Briggs Road intersection, between both the official plan that calls for that to be a 4-way intersection, as well as the fact that we have certain pushback from people that either don't want traffic signals or do want traffic signals or roundabouts, and a lot of that still needs to get settled out with a lot of the future players that are going to be adding traffic to this location, whether it be from a cost sharing standpoint or otherwise. But nonetheless, at this point in time, everything that we've done with the proposed entry point, which is a rerow, what we call a right-in, right-out only scenario, whatever money we've invested in that particular early phase of getting traffic out to 116 in the most minimalist nature, has also been done in a way that won't adversely affect somebody else's ability to widen the roadway to facilitate a dedicated turn lane for their own project, i.e. NRG. So our traffic consultant said that they will go through the recommended additional review and report back on that.
And am I muted? No, I'm good. And this is a topic that there was extensive discussion on, I think it was last summer, Alex. There was a meeting with the developer of the NRG project, ourselves, numerous representatives from VTrans, as well as town staff. And it was discussed any number of items as it pertain to access to their proposed project, which may or may not move forward. But the one item that was identified that they would like to see from our project was a slightly expanded right-of-way envelope to make way for a future turn lane for the adjacent development should they ever move it forward. And Dave, can you, I do believe that has been incorporated in our plans, correct?
Yeah, I kind of rambled through that in the introduction here, but yes, we did move the proposed improvements that we have as part of this phase 1 project off to the side enough to enable a future additional lane to be introduced on 116. So yes.
And then as that rolls into question 10, I'm jumping ahead just a bit here. That was also a topic of conversation with VTrans at that meeting, who had a chance to review our traffic report. And so that meeting was a point at which we were really talking about what our phase 1 looked like when built out, as well as the potential of the neighboring project being built out. And so as VTrans was reviewing all that information and prior to issuing our draft LOI, they really took a look at not just our phase 1, but what changes at that intersection may be coming. You know, so I think they did take a pretty broad look at not just what we were proposing, but other potential conditions in that intersection.
Right. So, I mean, just to reinforce, the things that we have basically been seeing is a lot of different ideas on how this particular portion of 116 can act as a gateway coming into the community, and a lot of different ideas on how to basically implement traffic calming measures at that particular location. So we were waiting for the dust to settle a little bit before we committed $250,000 on a dedicated left-hand turn lane. So that being the background, that's at least a selfish, discussion of why we didn't want to jump out into the middle of 116 with full improvements, only to have them bulldozed in the ground, perhaps, because of a different idea on how to manage that particular portion of the entry into town. So VTrans said, whatever you can do to avoid this issue, because it's still not ripe for picking just yet, is ideal. So that's what the write-in, write-out proposal that we have gotten our letter of intent from the Agency of Transportation for does. Is it basically kicks the can down the road. It enables a certain amount of traffic to leave the site or enter the site at a particular location, but it's not a full left-hand turn opportunity. That's all reserved for the Shelburne Falls Road, CBU Road intersection. And that's why that's so critical, to basically make sure we get that right for phase 1, with the understanding that as these other projects perhaps come forward, that the ideas will gel on what the community actually wants to have at that particular location. So this is a component of, let's just not get too far ahead of ourselves with regard to what is that necessary at that intersection. And that's what phase 1 does right now, is allows us to balance some of these uncertainties, but at the same time allows for a functional facility or a functional traffic circulation pattern.
All right, where are we at now, Dave?
Okay, Ben wants to go home. Okay. So item 11, last one. My notes say that we're good to go, but I'll read it anyways. Describe any traffic mitigation measures offered by the proposed development, period. So basically perhaps a bulleted summary that says, these are all the things that Haystack is committing to, and consider if mitigation measures associated with the Hanford Brothers project should still be pursued. So As part of any traffic management report, we're typically identifying what the existing conditions are, what the proposed conditions are, what the changes in operational characteristics are, what mitigation should be put in place to allow them to be at the proper operating range. And that ultimately is going to be the list. It may include some of the Hannaford or all of the Hannaford things, we don't know, only because we're going to basically remodel phase 1 without the Hannafords in there, and we'll see just where all of that falls out. All right, that's it for me.
All right, thank you. Board members have any questions on this, even though we're going to talk about it at the next meeting?
John Lyman, I'm all set.
I can quickly open it up to the public, just knowing that we're going to be getting into depth on this at the next meeting. All right, Mitch, what was next?
What was next? Well, first off, I just want to mention, just for the record, that we did get a couple of new letters from the public, actually emails from public. 2 of them basically today, which are in the Dropbox. One which Kate earlier happened to mention. It was from Kate, Bob, and Meg Handler, who's not here today. So I just wanted to mention that those happen to be in existence. And Joanna White had some comments regarding traffic, which can be dealt with at the next meeting.
Okay.
I'm checking my emails, and I have not received an email. So it seems that anybody in the public who has wanted to speak has had a chance to speak. So,
Mitch,
yes.
I didn't realize I could send you an email right now. I have some written comments. Should I send it to you now?
Well, actually, the email, the reason why I mentioned the emails was because in case somebody did not have an opportunity, somebody was watching on VCAM and couldn't join the meeting, or somebody who had joined the meeting had a problem getting their message across. But if you have a comment, I mean, I'll leave it to Dennis. You should probably say it now.
Do you want me to say it, or should I just send it as a written document?
That will be fine.
Sending it?
Just send it and we'll look at it at the next meeting.
Okay.
All right, we can do that too. The next part of this, I was basically going to say in a conversation with the board and Ben, I'll just mention, maybe I'm going to talk about the upcoming meetings. The May 5th meeting, we have a 3-lot subdivision final plot. May 19th, we have a site visit and a meeting on a sketch plan, 3-lot sketch plan. That's what we have coming up. I was going to mention everybody at 8:30, but David, you were on a roll. I didn't want to stop you, and it seemed like we did okay as far as the meeting.
I figured your watch broke.
Actually, you jumped in when I was going to say it said pretty much the same thing, so that was good. So the only thing I just simply just planning as far as how to go forward, which I think it's good to have. I mean, it's kind of best with the way things are being done nowadays. It's not a big, it's not like a meeting where you have to bring people from so many different places to try to have them. These remote meetings, I think, allow for more, but perhaps shorter meetings. Unless, Ben, you have a different thought on that. The thought being, though, is what would you like to have heard next? I saw in Dave's email that next meeting would not be good for stormwater, and actually I'd like to have a little bit of time to review and comment on what was sent today. So maybe something like that for May 19th. but is there something that we could possibly do at the next meeting? And just thoughts with people on that.
Perhaps what we could do, due to sort of the heavy lifting engineering items, being stormwater, which it looks like the 19th is the date that would work best. And that, Mitch, is going to give you ample time to review and have some back and forth with Andres, so that hopefully, possibly, we've got a final draft. So I think the 19th is a good day to address that, as well as the final traffic feedback, because it's going to take a couple of weeks for RSG to get that back to us. But again, that's going to give you 10 to 14 days to digest what RSG has to say, to distribute it to the board. And I think that it would be my hope that if we have all of that material to you completed in the next week or two, that perhaps we could close out those topics on the 19th. As for a shorter discussion on the 2nd, I think that would be a good time to dive into any of what I would call miscellaneous planning items with Mike Busher and I. Whether it's working through the renewable energy items, really that's sort of in your court, as far as if there are items that you feel we haven't discussed yet, or that the board feels we haven't discussed yet, but we would like to take on from a planning perspective. I think it would be a good time. There are some open-ended items to do with public spaces, proposed parks, things like that. We'd actually, for final, we'd really like to flesh those out and have a definitive open space and public space plan. So I think those could be great topics to discuss, to hear what the board has to say, so we can decide what we are or we're not putting in front of Public Works to weigh in on. Just housekeeping.
Mitch, what do we have on the 2nd?
And actually, let me clarify, it's actually the 5th. May 5th is the meeting date.
5th, okay.
Okay, 5th.
That said, we have Donovan O'Donnell's final plot.
Yeah.
That would be on the 5th. Hopefully that should be, since there is no new development being proposed, not a complicated one.
All right, so why don't we add Haystack to that meeting also then?
Sounds good.
I'd just like to comment to everyone, this went wonderfully. I appreciate everybody being on. I appreciate the public being on with their comments, and this, from my point of view, this meeting has gone swimmingly given the conditions.
Well, I just wanted to thank you and Dave for doing a great job explaining all the topics tonight.
No problem.
I'd like to thank the DRB for going with this and following through. Thank you.
All right.
Dennis, this is Alex Weinhagen again. It seemed like in the lead up to this meeting, you and Mitch worked together to sort of hone in on the principal discussion items that would be talked about with input from the applicants, so that they knew which professionals to bring to the meeting. It sounds like for May 5th, perhaps that same process could happen again, so that Mitch could come up with a defined 2 or 3 topics to sort of touch on, and then we can advertise that. I like that idea, because I think that there are members of the public that would like to weigh in on a variety of things, and they're kind of wondering when they will have the opportunity to do that. And so I'd like to be able to do that outreach to the community to say, here's what we plan to focus on at the next meeting. If what you want to talk about is one of those things, please show up, and please be ready to speak. Does that make sense to you, Dennis?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense.
That's fine. And
I can coordinate with Dennis and Ben, and we could come up with something that would work on that.
yeah, I think that would make a lot of sense.
Great.
All right. Do I need to make a motion to continue this to May 5th?
Dick Jordan, I'll second the motion.
All right, all those in favor?
John Lyman, aye.
Dick Jordan, aye.
Dennis, aye.
Ted Bloomhart, aye.
Sarah, aye.
Brandon, aye.
Greg, you awake? That's why I check. Yeah, that's why he connects without video.
Well, we got
Sounds
enough
like you
eyes
had
anyways.
enough, so.
We have enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay, meeting's adjourned, I take it.
Do we have other business or anything to discuss?
I kind of mentioned what the upcoming meetings were just a moment ago, so I think
Okay.
we're good. And we have no decisions to decide on.
All right. Move to adjourn.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you
Bye
all.
all.